Good morning, everyone. Clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, so this meeting of the Budget Committee is now resumed. And we are continuing our special meeting to review the 2022 capital and operating budgets. Up today on the agenda, we have a presentation from Corporate Services, and following that, there's going to be questions on each program area. I'll go through them so you're aware of what's going to be coming up. First, we'll have 311 Toronto. We will have Corporate Real Estate Management, Environment and Energy, Fleet Services, Office of the Chief Information Security Officer, and Technology Services. Following the presentation and questions, we are going to have questions only of the following areas: Create TO, Office of the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer, Office of the Controller, City Manager's Office, Legal Services, City Clerk's Office, City Council, and we'll end off the day if there's any questions of the Office of the Mayor. What we'll be doing after that, we'll probably be taking a break. We'll see how the timing goes. It could be just a natural lunch break for an hour. And from then we'll come back after the break, and we will do motions and speaking on briefing note requests. First of all, I want to thank everybody for getting, I think we got most of the briefing notes in that have come into clerks. But if there are any last minute ones, again, they need to get in, but it sounds as if that we have most of them in, which is good. And I appreciate everyone's effort to try to get them in early. And again, after that, as you said, we'll do the briefing notes, we'll vote on them, and then we'll end the day off. Just to let everyone know, we will be on Monday and Tuesday, we'll be doing public deputations. I've talked about them at each of the meetings. That's the opportunity for the public to present to us. We'll be meeting as a committee of the whole, and there'll be time slots from 9:30 to 12:30, 1:30 to 4, I believe, and then from 6 to 9, I believe. And anybody wants to depute, please get your name in as soon as possible. But again, will be a couple long days, important days, as part of the budget process where we hear from the public. So I encourage anybody to want to register, please do so. We'll be there to listen to you. On that, I'm going to hand it over to Josie Scioli, the Deputy City Manager of Corporate Services, to lead us through the first presentation. Josie, over to you.
Good morning, Chair, members of Budget Committee, and visiting councillors and city staff. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Corporate Services 2022 budget. I would like to acknowledge and thank the Corporate Services team, Abby, Asim, David, Gary, James, Lawrence, Marco, Max, Pat, and Robbie, as well as our FPD colleagues and Heather and SLT for their support of this budget submission, and many of our city colleagues for the great work that they do and support that they give us day in, day out. So Marco will also be helping me with this presentation today. Just on the next slide, we're just going to just go to the next slide. And I just wanted to just be very clear about something here. Corporate Services Division is actually our key enablers for the city in delivering the city's strategic corporate outcomes to achieve equity and reconciliation, climate action, health, and well-being. On the next slide, it talks about our mandate. Our mandate is a single point of access for city services to the public through 311. We lead the Transform TO program to achieve net zero through our Environment and Energy Office, providing safe and reliable service and ensuring economic and environment sustainability through our corporate real estate, our technology and fleet organizations, as well as protecting our assets and building resilience through our corporate real estate, our technology and cybersecurity areas, and supporting city building priorities through unlocking our assets like providing housing, transit, the digital divide, supporting that, as well as supporting economic recovery and providing innovative solutions to modernize government. The next slide is just really around scope. We have a huge scope around, we have over 9,500 assets between fleet and facilities. And if you look at technology, it has quite a few amount of devices between computers and assets and all that, so over 130,000. And then there's about 1.5 million calls within 301 that is taken on an annual basis. The next slide talks about our priority areas. There's 4 themes. They link right to strategic and corporate outcomes. The first theme is modernizing government, improving the customer experience, really standardizing, digitizing always with that equity focus, as well as workplace modernization, unlocking the value of our assets. We work with Creatio on quite a bit of that work. And the digital equity, leveraging our assets for the public as best as we can. We started to do that, especially during the COVID period, and standardizing and centralizing our citywide corporate functions. We have done that with real estate, with the work we've done on CREM and City and Creatio, and we will continue moving forward with technology, cyber, and fleet. On the climate action side, leading the Transform TO Net Zero program through our Environment Office citywide. From an asset lifecycle management, it really is having safe, compliant, and achieving the greatest value to support a growing city, and resilience, definitely protecting our assets and building resilience within the city. Those are our key priority areas. When we look at 2021, and what a year. 2021 again was an unprecedented year for the organization across, but corporate services did focus on some key initiatives that I want to just touch on a bit. Modernizing government, we have proved our digital capability. Digitizing 3-in-1 customer experience, we launched that in November of 21. We also started digitizing payments with revenue services and doing property tax and utilities, and we'll continue doing that in 22. Our new online booking system that we actually put in place for counters through the COVID period, as well as we scaled up 11,000 remote users, as well as obviously supporting clerks around the committee meetings and also the council meetings. And we also started the deployment of Office 365, which is a new collaborative platform that will help us on remote working and overall work across the city. On the climate action side, great work there too. We actually got approval for the net zero plan for 2040 and the existing building strategy. We expanded our Green Wheel initiative, and we also had expansion of our green fleet program on the electrical vehicle side. On the next slide, asset lifecycle management, some really great news here too. Our fire and life safety improvement plan that we had, and this was one that we had gone to council with and through an audit. We actually have a 17% improvement year over year. We're at just over 85% compliance, which is substantially much better than where we were, and we will continue moving that dial and supporting the return to office work that we have based on compliance and requirements through public health as well as occupational health and safety. On the resilience side, we deployed new tools for the remote meetings that we had throughout the last year and continue to do so. We built the cyber practice and oversight role citywide, and we continue to push that through, and you'll hear a little bit more about that. And to minimize risk, that's the critical part, especially as you move through digitization. And I am sure, because we're in our second year of training for our cyber training, I'm sure all of you have done your cyber training by now. So we're in our second year. And we've also secured space and supporting 9 immunization clinics through CREM technology, and then obviously supporting our housing and shelter partners on the work that corporate real estate has done. If we go to our operating budget, we actually add about 350 million net operating budget, which is about a $45 million increase over our projection of 21, which is 16.7%. The bulk of that increase, 75% of this increase, is related to cybersecurity and our COVID expenses. And there are some also amounts related to environment and energy, actually increasing our staff complement and dollars, our dollars around our budget, and also some work we're doing around the fire and life safety around annualization of our costs. And on the capital side, we have about 499 million for 2022 and just over 3.3 billion for the 10-year plan, which is about a 20% increase from last year's 10-year plan. And it's really related to the Etobicoke Civic Center that was below the line, and we've actually now have it above the line for funding. If I go to the next slide, the key areas of focus for 2022 goes pretty much in line with the priorities again. We're going to accelerate digital transformation, really the delivery service model that I talked about earlier. We'll continue to work on the workplace modernization program and also the return to office. We'll standardize the corporate functions, continue working with technology and cyber, and looking at standardization and centralization of common policies across the city. Ongoing acceleration and implementation of the climate supporting plan through the sustainable fleet plan and the net zero plan for city buildings, and supporting various agencies, corporations, and divisions as they start putting their plans together. And there's quite a bit of work to be done there, and we know that. We'll continue investment in our state of good repair on city facilities and fleet. will improve our fire and life safety compliance, and we're hoping to get to 95% in 2022, and will further improve our cybersecurity maturity through assessments and controls, and obviously mitigating efforts to protect city assets. And also we'll always continue supporting our colleagues across the organization on the key priorities around housing, transit, digital divide. We go to the next page. It's around our risks and challenges. Everyone has risks and challenges, as we all know. Organizational readiness around acceleration of modernization is going to be important here, as well as the impacts of the timelines of the work that we're trying to do on the centralization, standardization of technology and cyber based on all the priorities. And we saw with Omicron how that actually became a priority that had to come first. And we were actually ready to move forward with that. Also, the increased levels of cyber attacks will continue as you digitize more. So that is really important as to our posture of cybersecurity. And the climate action requires buy-in at all levels of government, businesses, and the community at large to achieve this. It's not just status quo, it's a push that we have to move forward with. The global supply chain shortages are a problem for technology, fleet, steel, drywall, lumber. We've seen that throughout 2021. We're hoping that it will correct itself within the next year. And Pat and the team are working with procurement. We're working with procurement on different ways of doing this. And then the one thing that came up in the last few days is the war for talent. Retention and attraction, working with academia, internal and external recruitment, as well as looking at succession planning, development planning with our staff, and looking at different types of ways of incentives that might support some of the attraction that we might have to do and retention. So these are things that we're working through because we know these are critical to the organization. And we'll continue on and looking at our aging infrastructure and making sure that we're investing into the aging infrastructure that we have. On the next slide, climate lens, really important, I think, especially some of these projects, and it's not just these, they're all across the city. The district energy plant within the ECC complex, that will be the first truly net zero community. Design standards in new buildings, we have that in St. Lawrence Market, we're also in the ECC. And the investments in deep retrofits in existing buildings through our workplace modernization, that will be really critical. Our new fleet garage at 1050 Ellesmere is also one important because it really supports the next generation of net zero fleet, and also supporting the community and our third parties with our GHG reduction programs that we have to support them. If I go to the operating budget, I'll just talk a little bit on page 13, on slide 13. 83% of our budget really is around physical assets, supporting physical assets and managing them around buildings, technology, and fleet. If we go to slide 14, where the money comes from, the bulk of the money comes from property tax, as well as interdepartmental revenues that support some of our departments. And where the money goes, it's to three major categories: our people, which are critical, our contracts that we have with maintenance, security, licenses, as well as tech and cyber support that we also require, as well as utilities. These are the three major areas. The next slide is the $45 million that I talked about increase year over year. It is broken down in three buckets. Our base is about 20 million increase. COVID is the 11, and new enhanced is about 14. I just wanted to clarify on the base side, 10 million of that is to do with cyber, and then we have some to do with some of the modernization work we're doing, as well as some of the incremental staff budget that we had to put in for environment and energy, as well as annualization of fire and life safety. If I go to the next slide, which is really, I've already talked a little bit about this around the cyber side, but just on the impacts on recovery, it's really around the return to office and getting our buildings ready for some of the work that's necessary to make sure our buildings are safe for our employees to come back. On slide 18, this is really around our capital plan. 94% of our capital plan comes from debt, reserves, and debt recoverable. And I'll just talk about where it actually goes towards, where the money goes. It goes to our corporate real estate side around AODA, which is about 55 million, and then also SOGR. It goes to our fleet side around vehicle replacements, and then it goes to technology around network assets and hardware replacements, as well as modernizing government through the digitization work. And then it also goes to the environment and energy work that we're doing there around renewable thermal energy programs and existing loans that we give to around programs too. And then lastly, our cybersecurity practice, which is around the foundation. If we go to the next slide, the 10-year plan, the 10-year plan really looks at, and I'll just hone in on the life cycle management. 55% of our plan is related to life cycle management. So it's really critical that the investments are done on the asset base. We do know that our asset base is growing. If you look at between now and 10 years, it's about a 20% growth. So the focus around that and how we actually apply, the investments and doing some really smart things as we're doing the office modernization work around our buildings, trying to do stuff once and not go there twice to do the work there. So these are things that we're looking at opportunities, and also some of the work that we're doing around our fleet and technology side. And then the last slide, really, this one depicts really the funding of the 10 years, again, around debt, reserves, and recoverable debt. And in this, I'll just hone in on the City of Toronto side. The other one that says 400 million, that's related to Etobicoke Civic Center, and the one that just went above the line and working with finance and some of the funding requirements for that. So that is my presentation for now, and I would like to thank the committee today for your time, and I will turn it back to the chair. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Josie. Appreciate that. Do we have any questions on the overall presentation before we get into each the other service areas? Okay, so why don't we jump right in? The first will be, where are we here? My notes. Oh, there we are. 311. 311. Oh no. We have questions on 311. Councillor Lai. Oh, first of all, let me see if there are any outside councillors. I don't see any here. Okay, I think it's just committee members. Okay, Councillor Lai, all yours.
Thank you. Just a quick question, Mr. Chair. For 311, how many, I would say, telephone operator for 311 are we budgeted for this year?
Hi, through the chair, we're budgeted for 119 FTE for CSRs,
so
which represents about 150 odd people that come along with that.
So do you think we have enough staff to handle the volume of the calls?
Through the chair, that's a great question. From a day-to-day perspective, we're very well staffed. We're overall service levels around 80 to 82%, depending on the nature of the business. But for example, in emergencies such as the last couple of days, where the inclement weather and what have you, no one's really truly staffed or properly staffed for that. So we all struggle through that together. But a good example, when we look at the service levels, which have been struggling for the last couple of days, right now this morning we're at 77%, and we'll be over 80 for the rest of the day. So we've stabilized.
Yeah, I understand that 311 has multi-language. Do you track how many different languages that did it come through? I mean, do you have a tracking on that one?
That's a great question. Through the chair, we can get you that report, but we definitely track that because we want to make sure that we're diverse and inclusive in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. What kind of training are you giving the 311? Do you monitor them, or like their customer service? I would say,
Yeah.
to me, they're the frontline people of the city.
Absolutely.
So it's very important that we deliver good customer service. What kind of training are you giving them that is included in the budget, or how do you monitor whether they are giving good customer service?
Great question, and through the chair, and I really appreciate that question, actually. Training is really essential, and especially when you look at last year and the year before with COVID and the change of the nature of the calls, which have a lot more intensity, maybe some aggression and frustrations associated with it. So for example, we really focused on ensuring that we had CAMH training for our staff to manage the call, deflect the call, but also not take the stress and some of the things home with them. So we made sure we focused on that, and all of our staff are properly trained on that. In regards to refresher training, for a good example, with the snowfall and things of that nature, we made sure that everyone was trained and retrained on snow removal and things of that nature. So the seasonality of it, we make sure that's always constant refreshing. And from a quality perspective, we monitor every call that comes through 311. So we know who are doing well, who's not doing so well, and we make sure that there's a coaching plan for them to hit a particular standard.
So who is monitoring? You mean the senior staff, or?
Oh, sorry, through the chair, we actually have a quality and performance team that's dedicated to this.
Okay.
And we also look for good behaviors and not so good behaviors and rectify them as well.
Yeah, these are the help desk, so it's very important that they have good behaviors. The reason I ask that is that a couple of instances, 311 has referred residents that live in Etobicoke to my ward. So
Right.
how does that happen?
Through the chair, that's an error. We have it's clearly documented in our knowledge base around who's responsible for what wards and what have you. I know, like, for example, Durham is looking to create a 311, and there might be some technical issues that come along with that. But everyone's clearly articulated and educated on the ward and who's responsible for that. And we'll make sure that we do a refresher just to make sure that that's consistent going forward.
Yeah, thank you. I really want to thank your team, and especially through this pandemic. I know how hard they work, and just keep up with the good work. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you
Mr.
very
Chair. Those
much.
are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Carroll.
Yes, thanks. Mr. York, we got an email with a briefing. We had asked about the number of people leaving, what the people plan is, what hiring needs to be done, and we're very surprised by the number of exits that we've seen. The chart just shows us from September 2021, and then projects into the future. Oh, have I frozen?
No, you're good. You're frozen a little bit there, Shelley.
I'm just turning off my video to be on the safe side there. So anyway, I'm not sure how much of that you heard now. The chart that was shared with us shows exits tracking in all divisions, but particularly in this one. The numbers are particularly high in this one in terms of people exiting the organization, and then the hiring needs to try and replace that. 311 is an area where we do a lot of expensive training and can't really afford exits. Are you seeing a lot of exits from your division? Is the wage freeze impacting us here?
Very, very fair question. And through the chair, I would say that when you look at the combination of the vaccination policy, retirements, and some exodus, the part of the industry and what's going on, their overall number that we're looking at in terms of FTE is around 12 to 13 people that are actually left the organization. Having said that, we have a hiring plan. We actually have by March, mid-March, we're hiring 14 people to bridge that gap. So from a Delta perspective, we're pretty good and pretty fluid in that way. We'll continue the training. And the other thing that we're trying to do, which is a very, very exciting thing to share, when we look at the overall trends of how people are interacting with 311 and getting information, the calls are relatively the same from year to year, maybe 100,000 calls up or down. But what's really interesting is the self-service aspect of our public. They're going through a knowledge base and servicing it themselves. So when we look at the numbers, and this also helps us with the FTE conversation. We have an additional 1 million transactions of people going online to service themselves. So part of the evolution, the transformation that we're doing, it's naturally going in that direction in the first place. So we are looking to definitely be consistent with the FTE that we have and use the proper resources appropriately and responsibly. But we're also making sure that our strategies also do some deflection, channel deflection, and more self-service.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? 311.
Yes, I have a question, Mr. Budget Chief.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Layton, you weren't on my screen there. And
My apologies. My video wasn't on there for a second. So
oh, there you go. Okay.
Now I am. Yes, thank you, Mr. York. So on page 5 of the report, under priority actions, you talk about closing the loop, and this is something I think, like, it's not how certainly not what we call it in our office, but I'm sure other councillors' offices do this when we are dealing with more complex casework, checking in with and providing updates, right? That's essentially what you mean here, right? Getting back to the constituent and saying, this is what we did, here's the resolution, or this is what we did, we don't have an answer yet. That seems to be a lot of the answers my office gives, which is fine. It's just we like to be in close contact. So you talk about it being a priority action for, now is the intention here for 311 to close the loop? So for an operator or for an interaction online, for a response to go to the constituent saying we're still working on it, or here's the resolution that we got. Is that what you're talking about essentially?
Through the chair, fantastic question, and absolutely. So what we've done is one of the reasons we've invested in the new CRM platform is to make sure that not only are we focused on closing the loop, but you're also, meaning the resident or the person who's initiating that request, determines how they want to receive that feedback. So for example, if you call into 311 and you want to call back return to resolution, we're preparing ourselves to do that towards the end of the year. If you create an email, you'll get an email response. If you want a text response, you have a text response. We're also looking to enhance our channels with mobile apps and things of that nature, which also keeps us accountable and very agile as well.
So let me get, is that automated, or is there a person involved in updating the file on the CSR,
Excellent question.
or on
Yeah,
the
our
automated
CSR.
system? Yeah.
Yeah,
Is
so
it
the CRM
person?
would be the client relationship management system.
Yeah.
And for
Sorry.
example, if you've come through the text or SMS kind of a scenario, it's automatic. So it's so as soon as the milestone update comes up in terms of the activity that's been done to rectify, let's say, the pothole, for instance, the customer at the other end or the resident at the other end will be notified appropriately. In terms of a call, that's more of a manual process, and that's when we talk about efficiencies and things of that nature. We're looking to make sure that our agents that may not have as many calls inbound, we can now focus on outbounding and providing them with updates as well.
Okay, because I'm trying to get wrap my head around how we're gonna increase the amount of time spent closing the loop with in an era of growing number of calls and not really a greater staff complement.
Right. So just to that point, and that's a very fair point, and that's our conundrum. So one of the reasons we're looking at this new technology is to really change the behavior of our public when it comes to interacting with the city. Over 90% of our interactions are now call. Even on vehicles, it's call 311. So we've retrained the public, our friends and families, to always pick up the phone to engage with the city. With this new platform in mind, which we've launched as of November the 1st, or actually October the 31st to be really precise. It's now about channel of choice and using the mobile app, chat, so on and so forth, and self-serving as well. So we're looking through the next few years to change the behavior and push more things online. So we're expecting about, hopefully, through the next years, a channel deflection of about 30%. So that means, reducing the calls to about 65% and push them more online. Now that's naturally already happened with the knowledge base and self-serve interactions in 2021. And it's gone up by almost 1.3 million interactions digitally, self-serving, not picking up the phone and resolving your issue yourself through the tools that we provided through the city.
Okay. And you're relatively confident you're going to have the staff complement to be able to do that with the new technology?
I'm confident we're going to try.
Can we
we're
try
do our
for
best.
Gary, can we try two really quick things? If it's possible for next year or in a future year, it may be helpful, about how much of that closing the loop actually happened. So as part of our service metric.
Yes.
And then the other is, like, I'd love to get a handle on customer satisfaction or resident satisfaction. I'm sure you have that. I suspect we do what most people do and say, could you fill out a survey, or so I'd love to know what the level of satisfaction is, understanding like we're all the counselors on the call have, and probably most of the staff know you're never going to get 100%, but and we appreciate you can aim for it, but it just won't happen. But just, do you have an idea of what level of satisfaction there is with each of the platforms too, differently, separately?
Well, because the platforms are now changing and being enhanced. So the first thing I can say overall, the overall customer satisfaction from our metrics are around 85%. And then we did also have an external party poll the public through the Toronto Star and what have you, to see what their thoughts or feelings were around the services that they were provided. And that number was also 85%. So from overall satisfaction perspective, I know there are going to be people that are very upset, and I understand that. I could give you a good example, a good stat just from a 301 perspective. Out of 1.1 interactions that we do from a call perspective, last year, just on 301, the division, not overall in the city, but the division, there are 340 complaints. So 340 out of 1.2 million transactions.
That's great.
So we're heading in the right direction. But one of the reasons we're also committed to this platform is going forward, and we're gonna do it in a phased approach. But going forward, every interaction will have a quality stat against it. So we'll be asking everyone either through the phone or through the other channels what they thought of the service. And we'll be able to report that for you by the end of next year for sure.
Listen, Gary, last time I checked, not a single councillor on this call or at this meeting got an 85% approval rating from their constituents. I got pretty close in 2014, but not quite 85.
Thanks, Councillor, and thank you, Gary, very, very much for all that you do.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go on to corporate real estate management.
I'm sorry.
Councillor Carroll,
Councillor Crawford. Yeah, no, I
Oh,
apologize. I couldn't get your attention earlier, but
I didn't know you were there, Councillor. Okay, sorry, we'll go to you then. Apologies.
that's okay. Before Gary logs off, I think I lost him on my screen. Gary, you still there?
I'm here. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have two quick questions for you, please. Councillors' offices previously had access to 311 by analytics, which would allow us to sort of check ward by ward, division by division, sort of service levels and inquiries, and then we would track that work, including looking up the status of cases. I think in our conversation with your office, you mentioned that you're moving to a new platform, and then we lost access to that very important piece of information. Are we going to get that back in the 2022 budget? Otherwise, it becomes very cumbersome because we're just trying to do our work and we have to come to your staff all the time.
Councillor, you're absolutely 110% correct. We are committed to get you back that information to be informed about the ward and the nuances. The challenge that I want to be transparent with is because we've changed the model in terms of the technology that we utilize, which is subscription based. So the challenge is it comes at a bit of a cost. So we're working through internally to automate and find an alternate solution. We're looking to test that alternate solution within the next 2 weeks, and then roll it out, to the councillors within a month or so. In the meanwhile, what we're doing is we still want to provide you with that service, so our staff are on board, and we'll provide you with that data pulled from Salesforce and what have you. But the automation and the self-serving aspect of it, we're trying to get it to you within the next month, 30 to 60 days, no more than that.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Just because we've been without it for some time, and residents reach out to different councillors' offices through all sorts of platforms. I know that oftentimes Twitter becomes a portal for residents, or even non-residents, to be quite honest, who tag councillors asking us to do 311 type of work, but then we can't do it because we don't have the same access anymore. So I guess a quick follow-up is, how is your division working hard to educate the public so they go through the proper portal? So we're not getting service inquiries through Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and Twitter, because all of that gets lost and it becomes highly inefficient as we try to redirect everyone to the proper channel, and really the only channel, which is 311.
Through the chair, first of all, I really appreciate your question. And this is something we've been talking about internally around change management, not just to educate the public about how to interact with the city, but to effectively what the roles and responsibilities are. So we've allocated some funding with strategic communications to come up with a plan, and you'll see that released very shortly in terms of re-educating the public around the processes and the effectiveness of the channels. A good example of that would be in the last, I would say less than the last 10 days, we had a complete Toronto-wide outage when it comes to the telephony systems. So you had multiple organizations where the phone systems were down. The challenge is, although 301 was down in terms of the phone system, or online on a Twitter feed and what have you was still functional and working, but not everyone was aware or utilizing that particular service. So part of our job is also to re-educate, and if people were using those services, there'd be less pressure on the infrastructure for other organizations. So we are looking to educate and do it in a more conservative, aggressive fashion.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next, corporate real estate management. Councillor Lai.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have asked the other departments about potential cost savings through contracting out of services. Can corporate management provide some information on why we do lease in-house instead of perhaps through a third party? Is there a reason why we do that?
Thanks for the question, and through you, Mr. Chair, to Council Lai, good morning. First and foremost, if I could just present a picture of the landscape of the type of leases we have within corporate real estate. The majority of leases we have are community space tenancies and below market rents that we rent to many community groups throughout the city. Where we do require sort of commercial leases, we will engage with commercial real estate companies on behalf of the city, whether it's specialized leases that we need for different divisions throughout the city, provide services to the city. And in certain cases, we've partnered with asset management groups. A good example of that is a head lease we have at Union Station. And most recently, the award we did with a developer at Wellington Destructor in Councillor Cressy's work. So it's more of a hybrid model that we have. So for the business as usual day-to-day, we use our in-house, and where it's specialized commercial leases or head leases, where there's a commercial application, we will definitely leverage the marketplace. So it's a hybrid model.
Okay, I see. Just to follow up on that one, how many appraisers do we have in the city?
Sorry, how many appraisers?
Appraisers, yeah.
So, we have a roster of appraisal firms we use. So every time we require appraisal, we'll ask for requests for quotations. I am revisiting that and looking at maybe putting standing offers together with some of the larger firms going to market so that we have a roster. But typically we will use a specialized appraisers depending on the type of appraisal that's required, whether it's land, whether it's hotels. And we do have an in-house team as well that we leverage as well when we're looking at city properties. So we have a balance again of hybrid. When we can do it in-house, we do it in-house. When it's highly specialized, we use appraisal firms.
I'm glad to hear that, because for some more complicated deals, for Section 37 negotiations, I think we do need to use maybe outside appraisers to kind of, give a second opinion.
No, great. We always want that balance, right? Because we want to understand, because sometimes we may not have the market intelligence that the market has.
Yeah. Okay. So I understand that for large parcel of city land, I think Create TO deals with them. But for smaller parcels, I think CRAM is dealing with them. So I just wondering who is the decision maker in smaller parcel of land, because I do have some issues with a very small parcel of land in my ward. I just wanted to say it's going nowhere because nobody is making any decision.
So thanks for the question, Councillor Lai. The city owns thousands of slivers of properties across the city. Some have some utility, some do not. Some are, abandoned roadways. We are working with Creatio to map out all of those slivers of land. I will say it is a work in progress to work on the smaller parcels of property, because there are councillors I see on the screen that have reached out to us that have had some challenges with some small properties. I will say I'm doing a realignment of the internal team to ensure that we're not just focusing on the big stuff, but the little stuff is as important. So I will say it is a work in progress, and I'm working to resolve that.
So just my final question is: are we projecting less office space required due to work from home, as a result of COVID? And if so, will there be any savings?
So, through the Modern TO Workplace Modernization Program, we're actually reducing our office footprint from 55 locations to 15. In that's about 1 million square feet. So we'll be exiting over the next 5 years about 32 leases, and Creatio, as part of that, are working on the disposition or sale of non-core assets. So with that, the objective of our program is obviously reducing our footprint and moving everybody into city-owned locations like Scarborough, North York, City Hall, Metro Hall, and then the new Etobicoke Civic Center. So we are actually through that program. Once the program's done, year over year, it'll be about $30 million in savings, 25 in operating, and about $5.5 million in state of good repair of that once we sell those locations.
Thank you so much, Pat. And Mr. Chair, those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other questions, let's jump over to environment and energy. Start with outside councillors, if there's any questions. Seeing none, committee members, Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. Who do we have here from Environment and Energy? Is it going to you, Josie?
So, so through the chair, Councillor Layton, we have our new Environment and Energy Executive Director, James Nolan. It's his first budget, so be nice to him. And then we also have a couple of his colleagues with him too, Grant and Fernando and Cecilia.
Josie, I'm always nice. Don't try to pass around rumors.
No, you're
James,
absolutely wonderful. Okay, there you
James,
go.
I think this is the first time before a committee, so thank you very much and welcome. I've got a couple of questions, and granted, you can use it's my first month for the rest of the month, I suppose. How has this budget been modified to reflect the increased ambition of the new Net Zero 2040 strategy and the actions adopted from the supplemental report?
Through the chair, I think for my first response, I'm actually going to defer to Cecilia Fernandez, who transformed TO report development on that question.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Councillor Layton, for your question. Sorry, my apologies. I'm having internet issues, so can't join kind of online in person. So in answer to your question, for the 2022 budget, a lot of the items that were negotiated in the short-term implementation plan are already included. So part of our process in identifying those actions was to also signal and work with the affected divisions on including those items within their 2022 budget plan. So those are already included in what you're seeing through these discussions. I'm sorry, the second question again, could you repeat it, please?
In the supplemental report that was to staff, were there any additional requirements?
Correct. So we did kind of skim through those, and we didn't see any large capital items. So most of those were report backs or additional research that we believe could be integrated in already ongoing programmatic work in those divisions.
So we heard yesterday from the TTC that they haven't incorporated in their additional required, or they haven't started to contemplate the additional capital that would be required for their the additional fleet and storage and maintenance of that fleet. Can you explain how we're going to start to incorporate those divisional actions into those divisional budgets? Because it strikes me that, like we heard yesterday, that finding space for 1,000 new buses is going to be a challenge that will take many years. If we're not starting now, is there a plan to bring those budgets up to actually reflect the decisions of and direction that you've gotten from council?
Yes, so thanks for that question.
We lost you, Cecilia.
Everything's happening at once. In terms of kind of the short-term implementation plan, again, I refer to the net zero strategy for a bit of a schedule in terms of what would happen for budget requests from specific actions identified already in the kind of the 2023 to 2025 period where that information was available. Specific to TTC, we have in one of the report backs in Q2 of 2022, TTC will be reporting back in terms of the increased bus request that needs to be able to reach some of our emissions reductions goals. In terms of the long term, so I think you're referring to kind of the long game, Councillor, in terms of reaching the 2040 goals. There's undoubtedly a much bigger increase in terms of what we need to have prepared. And so those discussions are happening and will happen shortly with TTC.
And maybe just supplemental to Cecilia's answer, I think broadly we're starting the implementation of the plan, so working closely across the divisions to look at what that increased mission needs to look like as we start planning for the 8 years.
So here's my concern. The financial modeling for the net zero technical report indicates an annual investment of $8 billion in 2022 for the TTC. The technical report also indicates enhanced spending of about $1.5 billion a year. That those aren't in the budget, correct? I have one more question, if I beg the indulgence of the committee.
Through you, through the chair, we don't have currently kind of a collation of all of the budget, kind of the budget requests that that would be able to for us to compare to that number.
So through the chair, it's Josie. We will come back to you, Councillor Layton, and validate. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Just as the last question, and it's probably just a yes or no. We're still developing our climate lens. I get that, and we have highlighted projects that have a benefit to the climate and to our resilience. Have we identified the ones that have a negative? I'm gonna take the silence as a no, and that was the expected answer. So
the answer, Councillor Lane, it's work in progress, right? And we have excelled a lot from the last year. So those are things that we'll take in consideration. So I will take that feedback. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McKelvey.
Hi, and I'm putting in a briefing note request about this as well. How many staff do you have and how many are you looking to hire this year?
I believe we currently have approximately 66 FTEs, actual individuals. We're increasing to 103, so it is a significant increase. We have a staffing plan that we're currently working with P&E and implementation of, and looking to get those people in place as soon as possible. Recognizing that some of those positions are technical in nature, so we want to make sure we have the right people, and we'll also have to balance out the usual comings and goings, internal hires, everything else. But we've got a plan to implement for staffing as soon as possible. That's one of the top priorities with the division, to support now implementation of the Transform TO plan.
Okay, and presumably that means, building out this action plan over the next 3 years, knowing what it costs, getting it costed, knowing what the amount of money is we need from other levels of government. Okay, have we seen from the federal government, who has said Canada is going to be net zero by 2050, have we seen from them how they're looking to contribute to funding towards that? Like, do we know what the increased funding availability is, what they're going to be looking for, what kind of guidance?
This is the host. Test 1 2. Test 1 2.
Okay. So I can see, Nahom, I can see the live button is red now.
I can see that as well, and I hear my audio going out to YouTube as well.
Okay. So we think we are live to YouTube. Seems to be stable for a few. Yep.
Good there, Matthew?
Yep.
So why don't we, it looks like if any of the committee members can hear my voice, looks like we're back live, so we can resume. I'll give it another minute or two just in case everyone.
Yes. Yeah.
Does
Technically,
this mean
don't
we have to
quorum.
go back to work?
Yes, we have to go back to work, Shelley.
Dang.
Yeah. And we do have quorum, but I'll just give it another minute. Okay, we're back then. We good? Matthew, just checking.
To the chair, yes, we are good. You may begin when ready. If I may suggest that the councillor re-ask their question in case it wasn't all captured. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So I was asking about the contingent of new staff, and I assume part of what they will be doing is looking at how to implement the net zero strategy to 2040, including costing. And my question was, can we fund this alone?
And I'll just go in. I'm sure my colleagues will speak. The answer is no, we cannot. Councillor McKelvey through the chair. We need the other levels of government to support. This is a massive endeavor, and we do need support, massive support.
Okay. And we haven't started to develop, though, like a full list of all those projects, and we can't cross-check them against their federal grants yet, or what they're doing, because we still don't know what their plans or programs are going to look like.
So through the chair, and I'll let my colleagues also speak to this. That is the work that we'll be doing, and to what James said, we'll be working with the federal government and the provincial government.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was a UN report. I have to find it. But it basically said no government alone can fund climate action, right? Like, I think we're knowing we need everybody at the table at this, and the US is looking at these massive infrastructure ranks. So, like, I think structurally, the whole financial way of doing this needs to be overhauled, and it's going to be a very different way of doing business. So, okay, great. So my questions were mostly about the staff compliments, and it sounds like you're ramping up to be able to do this incredible work. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Nunziata.
I just have one question. Fernando, I think it was you or James mentioned on some of the city facilities, and Mount Dennis is net zero, and that we are net zero in city facilities like community centers and that, correct?
Correct.
Right. Now, are we in discussions with Metrolinx as far as, the Eglinton line with all their stations and that? Are we working with them as well for their buildings?
Councillor, good question. Through you, Chair, it's Derek Twegel from Transit Expansion. Maybe I can provide an answer to you, Councillor. Yes, one of the key principles that we talk with Metrolinx on all the transit projects is energy and environmental issues, and the requirements within the various programs reflect many of the city's requirements with regards to those.
Okay, I just want to make sure that they're part of this because we have a number of stations, as you know, especially in my ward, Eglinton and Black Creek, and and I know Mount Dennis took the lead as far as the net zero in Mount Dennis, and we have the daycare center, first net zero daycare center in the city, in my ward. So I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next, fleet services. Questions on fleet services? Okay, well, next we'll go to the Office of the Chief Information Security Officer. Okay, next we'll go to technology services, the questions of technology services. Okay. That's corporate services. Thank you, Josie. Thank you for your team. Thanks for all the work you've been doing.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee.
So next we will have questions of Create Teal. Do we have questions of Create Teal?
I'm terribly sorry, Gary, if we just passed fleet. I'm sorry, I stepped away during the break. Is there any chance, I've just got a couple of questions. Is there any chance, I beg your indulgence if Jolly Moore is still on the call?
Yeah, that's fine. We did fly through fleet, but we can backtrack a bit. No problem.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess
I want to make sure the appropriate staff is still there. Okay, go for it. Go, Mike.
Okay, thanks. What investments and additional resources to expand and accelerate the program to get to net zero are being undertaken in 2022?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the question, Councillor. So we've increased our capital budget in 2022 to support the most recent Transform TO report that came through Council in December. So there's a significant increase in funding in 22, I think in the range of about $11 to $12 million, which primarily supports two key things. One is the transition of the fleet to, and with a focus on light duty vehicles, to electric vehicles, and laying down the charging infrastructure to support those electric vehicles.
That's great. Is it possible to shift some of the state of good repair money away from the existing fleet, like that being the polluting fleet, in order to expedite the sustainable fleet plan? Like if some of our trucks have 7 years and we got some state of good repair, is there a way of like just ending their life a little early and moving that into the sustainable fleet plan?
So our SOGR, the SOGR portion of the capital plan is in place to replace the vehicles when they come to the end of their life. So our current capital plan is supporting that transition of the fleet.
So
now,
maybe
when it comes time to transitioning to a new vehicle, our objective is to transition to a zero emissions vehicle, subject to its availability.
So maybe characterizing it as SOGR funding was incorrect on my part. Let's call it just maintenance, like taking some of the dollars away from maintaining vehicles in their latter years, and instead moving those dollars that are probably your operating dollars over to a faster transition. Like maybe our CFO should plug their ears because we're going to be getting rid of assets before their end of life. But I'm just like, I'm wondering, is there a possibility of doing that?
I would say that anything's possible, but you're quite right in that if we take those assets to end of life before we're ready to do that, that we would need to take that money and put it in capital to support us buying vehicles before we're planning to buy those vehicles. So the current capital program does not support what you're talking about. But it is possible to redirect those maintenance dollars back to capital to support a more aggressive transition.
Okay. And Mr. David, we've had some issues with maintenance, our contractors around maintenance and our vehicle, I can't remember what it's called, where we store all the parts. I don't know. No, it's not a warehouse. There's a word for it.
No, we have a vendor managed inventory relationship with Napa Parts.
Yes, sorry, there it is. Are there quality controls in place to ensure that we're overseeing the contractor for the maintenance of our fleet?
Yes, absolutely. So and this was as as a result of working closely with the Auditor General, but we do have a vendor audit program in place. We target to do 10% of the work orders on a monthly basis of work that's out to the contract base. And we use that data that we collect through those audits to manage quality and quality improvement with the vendor base.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Okay, questions of Create TO. Thanks again, Josie. Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Similar to the Auditor General, she can say for every dollar invested, she unlocks X amount. What kind of metrics do we have for Create TO?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, this is Vic Gupta, CEO of Create TO. So we have, I think it's in your budget notes that we've generated. Well, we have a metric around land value that we've generated, that we take that land value and reinvest it in city building priorities. So in particular, of course, you'll all be familiar with the investments we're making in Housing Now. So we've generated so far our estimation is about $1.5 billion in land value. We also track metrics around other city building contributions, such as affordable housing units, total units developed, employment land that or office space that we've secured, those sorts of metrics, jobs that we've created through the developments that we're working on. So we do have a whole series of metrics that we're delivering against. We obviously, as an organization, our mandate has evolved in terms of what the Create TO mandate is, and so we're no longer, we don't have a metric around generating revenue or income for the organization, but we have all sorts of other metrics around city building contributions.
Okay, and jobs specifically, that's an interesting one. Do you know what that number is? I don't know. I can pull it from the briefing note, but if you have it with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly through our Housing Now program, and I will say that this the questions you're asking, Councillor, are ones that we're very much seized with as an organization to really, kind of understand what are the appropriate metrics to measure. So it's an evolving discussion, but I can say that we've tracked that we will be generating over close to 20,000 full-time jobs, direct full-time jobs. Most of those are construction jobs, and about 12,000, just under 12,000 indirect jobs. So it would be a combination of construction jobs on the projects, which will have a certain lifespan, but of course those projects go over many years, so they're fairly long-term construction jobs, but as well as office, retail, and so on that we include in our developments.
Okay, and then the net zero strategy just passed, so I know it's probably not really incorporated or embedded into everything you do yet, but is that part of your work plan, or will that start to be a requirement for city lands that are unlocked through you?
100% through you, Mr. Chair. 100%. We have up until now, Councillor, followed and worked very closely with the Environment and Energy Office to ensure that we are meeting the minimum standard. No, that's not accurate to say it that way. We meet the TGS standard as adopted by Council at the time, but we are now moving towards the next standard that Council has adopted, and we strive very hard to get to net zero and net zero ready, which I think is a discussion about getting buildings to a place where they can be net zero when the economics allow for it. So I want to just say very proudly that our Etobicoke Civic Center project, which is going to be coming forward, is a net zero project. There's a district energy plant, and also the Basin Media Hub studio that was adopted by Council is also going to be a net zero project as well. So where we can, we really do work with our development partners to bring forward a net zero project.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other questions, you got off late today, Vic. That's good.
No, I
Oh,
think
sorry.
No,
Hello?
there's
Wait a minute. We're not done yet. Councillor
Hello,
Lai,
I
sorry.
sent an
no
email.
Kristen Wong, Councillor Kristen
Yes.
Wong Tam has a question too, Gary.
I'm sorry. You know what? Okay, that's partly because of my screen. Okay, Councillor Wong Tam and Carol. Okay, now I see. Sorry. I apologize. Back to Councillor Wong Tam.
That's okay, Councillor. And I know that the job is difficult, especially when we're all virtual. And thank you, Councillor Lai. And Vic, it's great to see you. Happy New Year. I haven't seen you since the year began. I'm just, from your briefing note, it appears that the savings from the office relocation has now plateaued. So whatever we were going to materialize in efficiencies is now embedded. But I also see that the staffing levels are going to go up, and I see that consulting fees seem to be on the rise. And you've noted in your note that you don't have a sustainable funding model as of yet. So I'm just curious to know, why are staffing levels, consulting fees going up, and when can council expect to see a sustainable funding model?
So through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for those questions, Councillor Wong Tam. You know, I think those are great questions to ask. You know, I think the reality for our organization is that the volume of work has increased significantly. And so we are working on more projects directed by council to do feasibility studies. I mean, keep in mind, anytime council moves a motion to ask Cratio to work on a feasibility of a particular piece of land, you know, what's involved in that is pretty extensive, right? I mean, we have to look at the density, the GFA, we have to model and do some massing work. And then, of course, we have to do up a pro forma. In some cases, and in many cases, we need, not just on those feasibility studies, but in general, on the consultant side, we need, you know, we hire architects, planners. When we talk about consultants, those are the external consultants. So we use those organizations to help us with the massing work and so on our Housing Now, on our development projects. And I think in general, our organization is a pretty lean organization in terms of the value that we contribute for the investment that the city is making. In answer to your question around sustainability, we are very much seized with the notion of becoming a self-sustaining organization again. We've and I don't want to take up all the time here, you may have more questions, but I'll just say this.
I do.
The model has changed, and so we no longer generate any income for the organization. All is invested back in the land. And so now we're going to look for opportunities to grow the pie, to grow revenues for the city through long-term lease portfolio, taking a more strategic approach. And so our plan is, and we're working very closely with the CFO and the DCM of Corporate Services on that plan. And I think, you know, we're working very closely. I can't give you a timeline, but we expect it to be within 3 years, we'll be self-sustaining again. I will say that we still do have a net zero budget, Councillor Wong Tam, that we are not a drain on the city. We've been funding the organization through its cash reserves, but of course that is not sustainable and we can't continue to do that. And so we are working very hard to develop a self-sustaining model.
Thanks, Vic. That was a very full question. Full answer, but I appreciate it. I'm hoping to get a little bit more specific, if I can, with respect to how Cratio and even CREM evaluates property, just recognizing that there's three standard appraisal methodologies that are used for land and different types of businesses. I'm just curious to know, your in-house appraisers, who may they be? How many do you have? Because I have yet to see, and this is before Cratio was created, but I've never seen an actual appraisal report generated by city staff. I mean, one page, you know, ballpark figurations for sure, but not a document that can be submitted to court to sort of stand and a cross-examination.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, Cratio doesn't have appraisal staff on board. We use external appraisers, and I think this is part of the role that we play with CREM as part of the overall real estate model. CREM, Pat Matozzo's group, they look after we work with them primarily on the appraisals, and so I think you know, I know that CREM has already spoken, but we can circle back with you. I can follow up with Pat to get you some specific answers. I mean, we typically, Councillor, would, work out the business agreement and then rely on CREM to work with us on the appraisals. And I think Pat spoke to that earlier, their appraisal methodology, but happy to provide you a more fulsome answer.
That's great, Vic. I welcome any of that information. My final question was regarding a specific transaction. You'll know it because we had a conversation about it at the Radisson Blu Hotel at 249 Queens Quay. I had flagged for you and as well as CREM staff that I thought the valuation was extremely low. That report has left council and you were directed to go get 2 additional appraisals to reappraise the property. I'm just curious to know the process of report back. Is anything coming back to City Council? So therefore we know the outcome of those appraisal reports or is any of this going to be made available to council or just overall, whether by way of update to council or through another staff report?
Yeah, I mean, through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know what, I don't have in front of me exactly the motion or the recommendation in terms of the report back. I can tell you that, of course, we are, whether it's by way of a briefing memo or a report to council, happy to report back, of course, would interested in doing that. I can tell you that CREM has engaged 2 firms to conduct those appraisals and we're still awaiting the results on those. But yeah, happy to report back in any form that council would see fit. And we'll review the council resolution to determine what that is.
Okay, thank you. Either a briefing note or a report back to council. I would welcome either one. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Carroll.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gupta, hi. When I'm looking at the operating budget by revenue and expenditure category, I'm on page 9 in the city's analyst notes. Can explain to us what service fee from corporations actually is? I'm not sure we all understand this.
So I thank you, Councillor Carroll, and through you, Mr. Chair. I'll speak to it, and then I may invite our CFO, Jaspreet Pansar-Kolasingham, who has also joined me to provide a more detailed answer.
Sure.
If you recall, Councillor Carroll, the Cratio is the agency that then is still kind of responsible for the 2 legacy corporations, which is Build Toronto and TPLC. Those corporations own the assets. So the Portland's assets are held by TPLC, and Build has its own other sets of assets. And all of the reserve income or the cash reserves are held in those 2 corporations. So when we say these are charged back, Cratio itself doesn't hold any of the revenue. The revenue is held, or the income, the dollars are held in the 2 corporations, and Cratio charges each corporation a fee so that we can basically, all our staff are paid for by Cratio. So the staff are part of the Cratio budget, but the actual money sits in the 2 corporations. That's where the cash reserves are. And maybe just
so when I see in 2021, for instance, when I see that the budgeted draw from those corporations is different than the projection. The projected, that's a substantial increase then to the original
Hello,
complement.
this is the host. I apologize again for the interruption. It appears that we are again experiencing the same issue we were experiencing before with YouTube and the live stream. To the chair, if you can just give us a moment to attempt to troubleshoot once again. Thank you.
Oh, it just came back. Nope, it's gone. Okay.
Well, hold that thought.
So,
hold that thought.
Yes. So we'll come back to this spot. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, it appears that we are streaming again. I'm just asking the host to confirm.
Yes, this is the host to Matthew and the chair. It appears that the stream is live again. You may resume when ready. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, Councillor Carroll.
Okay,
You again.
so we've got the cost of the new employees. So what are the compensation increases to the other 69 employees?
So Councillor Carroll, through you, Mr. Chair. So we did follow the city's guidance on freezing salaries and the Cratio bonus, the Cratio STIP program, as well as any promotion. So for the past 2 years, the organization hasn't had any increases in salaries or any promotion. So we actually have gone further than the city has in that regard. And so what we've budgeted for is a modest COLA increase in line with the city. We've budgeted for some other salary adjustments and promotions, and we budgeted for a reinstatement in anticipation of a reinstatement of the bonus program.
So those are things you're planning that will happen over the course of 2022, and they will come before the board before they happen?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And similar to Councillor Wong Tam's questions about, the other fees, the other things that have gone up, consulting fees, etc. In terms of sustainability, those are costs that you're going to be vulnerable to if they're all outside. Is the plan to get to a hybrid model whereby some of this expertise is in-house, and then extraordinary projects would be served outside of the office complement?
I think that there's through you, Mr. Chair, I think that there is always going to be a base level of support. I think the staffing there's a level of expertise in the organization that we are not going to outsource. I think where we outsource in terms of consultants is, as I said to Councillor Wong Tam, it is in those specialty areas around hiring architects and planning consultants and so on to help us with that kind of work. The expectation for us is we do generate some income from our Portland's property management business. We are working very hard to grow that. The industrial class has grown considerably, of course, we all know that. So there's a lot
you have
of
great growth there. There's great growth in that fee. Yeah.
Yeah. So Councillor Carroll, I think it's really important for us. We have come a long way, I think, in terms of becoming sustainable, because the city we are no longer paying the dividend, which was another drain on our resources, and we think there are opportunities, again, through a more strategic look at the long-term lease portfolio, for example, that the city owns, looking at remnant land parcels, something that Councillor Lai had talked about. These are non-developable parcels that maybe not have meaning to anyone but the adjacent landowner, for example. And so I think we need a much more robust look at these opportunities so that we can create ongoing sustainable revenue for the organization. And keep in mind, I think as I said, we've generated in the neighborhood of $1.5 billion in value. The increment we need today to be self-sustaining is about $10 or $11 million a year. So I think a $10 or $11 million commitment cost.
Well, like you need 16 million a year.
Well, we need 16 million a year. You're right, but we're already financing ourselves to the tune of about five to six from our existing income. And I'm saying the net that we would need that we're short is about 10 or 11 million. And I'm just making the point that kind of a contribution against, I think, the value that we're generating in the land that's being invested in housing and community centers and childcare is certainly, I think, a pretty good return on the investment. But that said, we're not relying on the city. We want to be self-sustaining. We think that's important as a fundamental principle for the organization.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that.
Councillor Lai, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Mr. Gupta, for the Budget Committee meeting.
Thank you.
I'm hearing a lot about the self-sustaining model that you're talking about. So I just wanted to understand that you said that we are doing property management for the Portland. Is Creatio into the property management business?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Lai, we have always been in that business through the Legacy Corporation, Toronto Portland's company. The Toronto Portland's company owns the real estate in the Portlands on behalf of the city. And so we manage that portfolio. We have a property management team. We've taken a much more aggressive and strategic look at that real estate to add value. That's where the RFP that went out on regarding the film studio that council has approved. So there's going to be a increase in generation of rent, as well as jobs, as well as investment into our city from that asset. And we're doing that review. We're working closely also with our colleagues at Waterfront Toronto, to develop mixed-use communities into the future in these areas. Some of these lands will be maintained as industrial or employment lands, and we think there's an opportunity to generate significant revenue from those lands to help sustain the organization.
Yes, I'm also hearing about that your 16.3 million operating budget, you're only lacking maybe 10 to 11 million. And what other revenue can you actually add to this? That you wanted to kind of achieve this goal in 3 years' time?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Lai, as I mentioned just earlier to Councillor Carroll, one area, for example, that we're looking at is the long-term lease portfolio. The city owns and leases. There's probably close to 100 long-term leases that we own, that we lease out, and we're working closely with CREM we're going to engage in a process to review those leases to see how we can increase the rent. There's a lot of opportunities. Some of those leases have very little tenure left on them, and so there's an opportunity to look at how can we increase the rent. We all know real estate has increased in significant value, and we think we can leverage that to generate more income, for more revenue for the city. So some of the revenue will stay in-house to Creatio, but most of it, the land is owned by the city. We would negotiate those deals, and then those increased in revenue would come to the city.
Okay, just speaking of CREM, I'm very happy to hear that, the appraisal part is usually led by CREM. So how does Creatio work with CREM? Are there any other things that you work with CREM to avoid overlap and duplication?
Yeah, I think through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Lai, we work very closely with CREM, and what we try to establish is our role as Creatio is to look at the real estate from a strategic perspective. We look after the development planning work, the portfolio strategies, the strategic client relationship management, and CREM helps transact. They provide the transactional services and the support for much of what we do. Of course, Pat's team also looks after facilities management. I think where we intersect is where there is always a risk of duplication. And I think that tends to be in the transaction area. So once we, for example, negotiate a business agreement, and then it goes over to Pat's group, and then they will look at doing an appraisal or actually sign a lease agreement. So I think there's no secret to it. We just work really hard, and we stay in constant communication to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts.
Yeah, so those leads you mentioned about that coming overdue, so CREM will be able to negotiate those leads, not Creatio, am I correct?
Well, I think, we look at it from the perspective of anything that has more of a strategic lens to it. That is where Creatio comes in. So, when, the lease that was negotiated for the RFP on the Basin Media Studio, for example, that's an 85-year long-term lease that was negotiated by Creatio. So we would negotiate the business points, and then CREM would actually, do the business transaction and work with city legal and so forth to actually do the business agreements. We would negotiate the business deal.
I see. My final question would be, I know that currently the major focus on the city lands are for housing. And other than the Portland and the waterfront that I'm hearing about, mixed use and, revitalization, what other employment opportunities that would bring, these are the employment opportunities that would bring job and revenue to the city? What other project that Creatio is working to create, other than housing, more jobs, employment, and revenue to the city?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lai, for that question. So you're right. The Portlands is a major area of focus in that regard. The other area of focus is just north of the Portlands, the Booth Yard, where the East Harbor development is occurring with First Golf, now with Cadillac Fairview. There's about 3.5 million square feet. That's all employment land. So 3.5 million square feet of density of employment land. Very, very significant opportunity there. Also, Downsview has, I believe it's about 1.5 million square feet of designated employment land there that we are developing as part of the redevelopment of Downsview. And then I think it's important to note that we work very closely with our planning department, to ensure that these Housing Now or any of our housing developments are complete communities. So not only is it housing, it has all the other, we try to have all the other services, but employment is one of those. And so we've actually, I think we've earmarked in all of our affordable housing projects, and including in some of the modern TO projects that'll be coming forward, in the neighborhood of about 1 million square feet as well in employment. So, I'm glad you've asked the question, because we understand the city's focus around mixed use communities, and we're holding tough to that. So we're developing employment land, office development as well, along with the housing that we are doing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, Office of the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer questions. The CFO and Treasurer. Councillor Lai. You're on mute, Councillor.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just a couple of quick questions for our CFO. Can you remind me again of how the 15% debt service cost is measured? Is it to revenue, or is it the full cost of serving the debt?
Thank you, through the chair. So Councillor Lai, the debt servicing costs for municipalities must include both the provision for the interest as well as the principal. And so council has a policy that the debt servicing costs of principal and interest must be maintained within a 15% threshold of the total property tax that's generated by the city on an annual basis.
Okay, thank you. I noticed that we found savings by using the TTC insurance brokerage for our city vehicle fleet. How much is the savings?
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask Melissa Ferreira, our Director of Risk Policy, to respond to that.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Lai. Through the chair, so the TTC Insurance Company is a licensed insurance company operated by the TTC. And by insuring the city vehicles through this insurance company, the city is saving about $250,000 per year in premiums. As well, it allows us to release the collateral that the city is required to hold over time as the old claims run off or are settled.
Are there any other areas that we can self-insure to realize these kind of cost savings?
Yeah, so great question. I think there are opportunities to self-insure in other areas to realize cost savings. Considering our property premiums now account for more than 71% of our overall insurance premium spend, this is one of the areas that we're going to look at different models to achieve cost savings. Once this analysis is complete, we're going to come back to council with some recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other questions, Office of the Controller. Okay, next up, City Manager's Office. Councillor Layton.
Yes, just very quickly, does the City Manager's Office, I notice, and I'm quite appreciative of the increase in the Indigenous Affairs Office to address the Reconciliation Action Plan that's coming up to Council, I suspect, in the new year. or early in the new year. I'm wondering if we have a complete accounting of the city's contributions, financial contributions and resources dedicated to Indigenous affairs and reconciliation, Indigenous specific housing, programs through our CPIP grants, etc.
I don't have that complete number off the top of my head. So,
okay.
But you rightly point out it's more than just what we invest in IAO. So, but certainly that's something I could tell you.
I think it would be an interesting exercise at some point, perhaps after the budget. I think you may have some policy direction at budget to go down this bit of a road for a little bit, just to explore what our actual contributions are to Indigenous community and reconciliation. But thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, seeing no more, next to City Council budget. Okay, none there. Last, the Office of the Mayor. Okay. Members, that is it. Good morning. I'm going to suggest, by the way, if we maybe just, it's 11:12, if we just take a half-hour break just to get everything organized, I think we're in really good shape compared to other years. That way we can get out, a lot earlier. So if that's okay with everyone, why don't we just take a 30-minute recess, and then we'll come back. We'll do speaking and all of our briefing note motions, vote, and then sorry, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Chair, sorry, in your list of questions there, I did not hear City Clerk or City Legal, I believe.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe I made a mistake. Okay, apologize. Legal Services and City Clerk's Office. Okay, we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you for that correction, Matthew. Appreciate it. Okay, so we'll take a recess. It's almost 11:50. Why don't we come back at 11:45? If that works with everybody. Okay, great.
To the chair, you may begin when ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. We are back. We are now going to begin motions and speaking to what we've heard over the last couple of days. I'd like to begin as chair. Mr. Clerk, I do have a couple of motions, briefing note requests, if you want to put them up. First, I believe, is for seniors services and long-term care that I request the general manager to prepare a briefing note detailing the city's proposed approach to motion care and associated costs. I'll just give a sec to get them up.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, we were just preparing to we'll place your motion on the screen. Here it is now.
Perfect. It was all advanced circulated. Second is Social Development Finance Administration for the Executive Director of Social Development to do a briefing note detailing the Social Development Finance Administration's funding levels since 2015, including 2022, charting SDFA's share of the total city budget to that time and period, and also to list the SDFNA's initiatives introduced since 2015. The other briefing note is with the CFO to request the CFO and treasurer in consultation with the general manager, shelter support, housing and administration, and the housing secretariat and chief executive officer to prepare the following: a brief comparison of those three divisions and agencies operating budgets versus their proposed 2022 operating budgets, breakdown of the funding between the city, province, federal governments, initiatives introduced in that time span, and a comparison of the three divisions and agencies' 10-year capital plan, and just a breakdown of all the funding. Those three briefing notes will hopefully identify the amount of work and what has been done in all of those areas in the city, and extensive investments from my perspective. First of all, I want to thank, we'll start with the city manager, and we'll start with everybody who has been before us over the last number of days, bringing their budget requests to us. Thank you. I think all of us, on behalf of all of us, and we've said this a number of times, for the, it's been a challenging number of years for everybody, but I think for our staff all across the city, and we have seen that from the city manager all the way down, emergency services, you name it, everybody has come to us, has been impacted on the city side by this budget. It's been really 3 years of challenges that we have been facing as a city. When you're looking at, presently we're looking at just the vacancies, we're looking at the redeployments. You have done an incredible job, and I don't think we can thank you enough for the work that you've been doing, and specifically on the budget that you've been doing over the last number of months. This is a reasonable budget. It's going to ensure that Toronto gets through the Omicron surge, and ultimately this pandemic is going to come across, we will come across and back stronger than ever. When I look at the budget, I look at three different areas myself, in my role as budget chair. Number one, and in no particular order, is the restraint. We have to be showing restraint, and I think we have. As much as there have been challenges, we have to show restraint. We've been doing that, and I think we heard that when we were listening to all of the different divisions coming before us. Almost $500 million this year in cost mitigation, cost savings. We have been doing our part as a city, which is incredibly important. I mean, there's $1.6 billion over the last three budgets in savings and restraints that we have been doing. The other part of this, of course, is regrowth. We need to come back. We need to grow. We need to be the city that we once were, if not better. And I'm confident in the presentations and the budgets and the numbers that I've been seeing. We will be able to do that. The city manager has been investing. When you're looking at some of the areas of where we're investing, these are targeted investments, important investments, but I think they all focus on regrowth and bringing our city back stronger than ever. Look at what we're doing in long-term care and the emotion-based care model. We're hiring 62 new paramedics. We've lowered, not technically a budget issue, we're lowering small business taxes. We've expanded sidewalk clearing all across the city, and what better, look, even though we're having a few challenges out the gate, we're doing that. We're going to be restoring TTC to the pre-pandemic levels, and we've been freezing transit fares. So that's just an example of some of the things that we've been doing to really look that we come back stronger. Third part of what's really important is the respect. And I've already said that we respect the work that staff have been doing all over the city. We've been respecting what the residents across the city have been doing to ensure that, we get through this, getting vaccinated and doing their part. But we also have to respect the other levels of government. If it wasn't for the other levels of government, we would not be in the position where we are today, where we can retain all of our important city services. In this budget alone, we are asking for $1.4 billion from the other two levels of government. And we have to respect them and thank them for the work that they have been doing to help support not only Toronto, but all municipalities all across the city. But again, with respect, and the fact that we have $1.4 million request in there, it is only a request at this point. We do not have the commitments from the other levels of government. I'm confident, I'm hopeful that we will get that. But we can't look at that as a guarantee. We can't look at that as if, you know what, we got it 2 years ago, we're going to get it this year. I think we have to respect those other levels of governments for the challenges that they are facing, and the spending we want to do. And, you know, really, you know, you add to the budget, you add, you know, whether it's, you know, $500,000, a couple $1 million or more. And, you know, the fact is we still are in, you know, $1.4 billion is not there to balance this budget at this point, other than we do have a balancing strategy. You know, the sense I get, and I've heard it before, is that, well, let's just send the bill to other levels of government. You know, we'll get what we want, and we'll sort of figure out that they pay for it. That's not the way to be managing this budget, and that's not the way I feel is important to be managing the city. We need to be doing better. We're doing a number of briefing notes here. What I can't be doing myself, I'm going to find it very difficult to be supporting any briefing notes or any.
Mr. Chair, so the first briefing note is requesting the city manager report back on the contingency plan for the 1.4 billion, including the potential impact on the city's capital plan, what this might mean for the local economy, including jobs, what the continuing impacts for that could be beyond 2022 if we don't receive that funding from other levels of government. The second I spoke to during the E&E discussion earlier, just asking for the full-time equivalent complement, including the vacant positions. The work plan of when reports are coming back to council this year, because we have some exciting work being done by them. The third is something residents always ask me about. They just want to know when it's coming. We know there's some more outdoor ice, in particular in cricket, that's coming. So what are the years for that, so we can share that information with residents. The fourth is about the ravine strategy. What is the operational funding that's included for invasive and litter species, litter removal, as well as any student work, proposed investments in the capital plan, including the intergovernmental support we've received, and then what is required in the next 5 years. Transit expansion, briefing note on the Eglinton East LRT, including the allocated planning and capital funds, intergovernmental funding, including any remaining PTIP funding, and how many people in the city are working on this project. And the last is transportation services. Not a surprise to anybody, asking about progress that was made in 2021 towards Vision Zero, and across the board, what are all the investments, operating capital that are proposed in this budget. I just want to start by thanking the CFO, Heather Taylor, and Stephen Conforti for their great work to put this together, as well as all the other staff that have been involved, and also I think Councillor Crawford for his leadership, and including his words there that are, you know, really difficult to say, that like, we're broke. We need $1.4 billion, and it's not a year where we can add a lot to the budget, and it really it's going to be tough decisions ahead to do that, and I thank him for his prudence and his leadership in that regard.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm noticing there's an outside Councillor Wong Tam. I don't know if you wanted to speak at all, or we're just going to continue on.
I'm sorry, Chair, I don't know where you folks are in the agenda, so maybe I can just follow along and try to.
Okay, no, I just noticed you there. I just thought I'd acknowledge you. I think Councillor Layton, I know you had a few motions you wanted to move, so do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Budget Chief. First, that the city manager request the city manager prepare a briefing note detailing the sources of the 494 million in offsets, the total number of FTE positions currently at the City of Toronto, total number of FTE positions currently filled, and the total number of vacant FTE equivalent positions, and the total number of positions currently being held temporarily, but not due to the pandemic response. From MLS, the breakdown of current number of staff in non-generalized enforcement units, performance indicators for rent safe, specifically how many calls are received, how many of them are responded to. C, the required staff complement and budget to provide enhanced service standards for emergency and health-related safety related to a whole list of different program areas. D, how we can accelerate the creation of the administrative monetary penalty for Section 354 violations. Sorry, I think it's written slightly differently on the clerk's copy, but essentially the same thing. The next one is to shelter support and housing, requests the general manager provide a briefing note with resources and operational changes are required to expand the housing allowances to meet the needs of those experiencing homelessness. B, an estimated breakdown of the costs necessary to ensure everyone living in shelter, hotel, or 24-hour respite could receive 1 year rental subsidy to enable independent living. C, a cost analysis of additional funding needed for housing supports for individuals who are unable to live independently. 5, requests the GM Shelter Support and Housing prepare a briefing note showing the current allocation in their budget provided to provide free menstrual products for service users and city fund shelters, and then the other associated services. Environment and Energy requests the Executive Director provide a summary of information regarding short-term implications plans across 20 divisions. B, how the budget plan has been modified to reflect the increased ambitions of net zero. C, what years of the plan are we in, compared to the financial models for net zero within the net zero technical report. D, details of the discount rates in net zero project planning across the city's corporate financial models and plans, including accounting, access management, and investment. E, detailing in consultation with the TTC what improvements in public transit are necessary by 2030 to meet the net zero 2040 target, what investments are needed in the 2022 to 30 capital budget to achieve the current net zero 2040 plan, and with the metrics involved. And finally, Toronto Public Health requests Medical Officer of Health provide a briefing detail of the resources are necessary to expedite work and open an office focusing on the coordination of mental health and addiction services by the end of the year. I would like to, this has been a very difficult last two budgets. The work of our CFO, our city manager, and I would say the whole emergency response table has been incredible in ensuring that we've been able to maintain the level of service that we have in the city, despite actually service levels, as far as I'm concerned, growing. Like, we may have had less service on the TTC or less riders on the TTC, but the pressures on the rest of our system grew enormously. And for that, like, kudos for keeping us above the waterline. When our budget chief looks to characterize what he looks for in a budget with words like restraint and respect, while I can appreciate the words, I look to words like compassion, vision, and efficiency. Are we using the dollars we have most efficiently? Are we using them in order to advance a compassionate and fair city? And are we doing it in such a way that looks forward at the future generations of this city? Now, while we have made progress on those three areas, in my belief, in the last 4 years, or 3 years, I can honestly say I believe we have made progress towards that end. I think there are places that we can improve. It is trickier in a year where we have the budget shortfall that we have, granted. But let's not forget that the other levels of government contributed to us having the financial precariousness that we currently have. The city put on the table in the last term more resources, more revenue resources. Provincial government of the day turned us down. It hasn't resurfaced yet, right? Like, we haven't been able to advance additional revenue sources that are a more, in the budget chief's word, respectful way of collecting resources within our own city. We haven't. We have locked ourselves into two tools that aren't particularly equitable, and that everyone is incredibly scared of increasing: property taxes and municipal land transfer tax. Raising the revenue to run government is probably one of the most difficult things to do as an elected leader. But it's one that I think we need to get more comfortable with if we're to achieve the long-term visionary, compassionate goals that we have as a city to provide supportive housing and affordable housing, to ensure we meet our climate objectives, to address the large city building objectives that we have as a community. And again, I'll say it, it's like, I think we have made steps along this regard. Are they the The size of steps, I think I would like to see us be making. No, they're not, and that's why in past years I've supported an additional increase in our revenue in order to help achieve those. But I think our staff are doing an enormous job with the resources that we allocate to them. I don't think we are a group that is a rubber stamping committee that is simply an accountability committee for the city manager's budget. We have drawn the rough lines of where we want that budget to go with respect to revenue. It's our job to look at that budget, and I think again with always with the notion of efficiency, but particularly with the compassionate eye and the visionary eye, to say we think you can do more, and here's how we're going to support that effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Good words. Anybody else to speak?
Councillor Chair Crawford, I don't have great internet, so I had my video off,
okay.
but I think I do have a motion there for a briefing note.
Yeah, I think you do.
Pardon?
I think you do, yes.
Oh, okay. Did you want me to go next?
Yeah, you can go next.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chair,
The video on for now. If I suddenly freeze, I'll turn it off and rejoin you. I don't have a lot of briefing notes. This is just a quick one. It's breakdown that I would like to have on long-term care. Request the general manager to provide a breakdown of which level of government funds each component of the compensation for a full-time employee in long-term care, including any differences in the formula between the base positions, the people who always existed, and the new positions the province is offering to fund to support the new emotion-centered care. It's just a detail I want that goes along with details that I was looking at throughout the budget in the areas where we cost share services and where we're finding the most pressure from the pandemic right now. Mr. Chair, we have in this draft budget from staff, we have for I think for the first time in a long time, a very realistic ask in terms of the property tax increase. The part that's going to go largely to operating is in line with true inflation. There's a lot of headlines being made right now about a 4.8% inflation rate, but in fact, that 2.9 that is the non-city building fund part of our rate is I'm told by the Globe and Mail a more true picture of inflation. A lot of the inflationary number Canada-wide right now is being driven by some COVID impacts, an underestimation in the supply and demand economics of COVID. A lot of suppliers underestimated the number of Canadians that would just go right on owning their homes and right on making money. We're some of them. Look at us on the screen. Our circumstances didn't change. 2/3 of Canadians own their homes. Another 4% have enough wherewithal that they are currently in the market to buy a home. But the rest of it is what we have been dealing with on a crisis basis all year long. And those are the people that are really being hit by inflation. Those tenants who are finding their tenancies less and less affordable every year, and those that have no tenancy at all, those that are homeless, and we are putting so much into. And that's why I started to focus on what are the contributions of other governments. I usually leave it to other councillors to speak to that in a budget process. But in a year when we are subsidizing and maintaining over 20 emergency hotels all over the city, many of them in out here in the inner suburbs and places where we haven't in the past, people having to come downtown to get a COVID test and then be shipped by us back out to 4 Point, Sheridan, and Rexdale. We're doing things like that. And to alleviate this crisis, what is the provincial government's contribution to our spend this year in shelter, housing, and support capital to solve that housing crisis? 0.3% of the budget. 1/3 of 1%. That's it. They're putting in $3 million. We're putting in over $800 million. Much of it funded from debt that we will incur, not them, we will incur that debt. And yet, for those who got wealthier, and the most wealthy Canadians only got wealthier during COVID because they had business interests in the online world and they just got more and more wealthy. We don't have access to their funds. The province does. We'll see none of it. The province will see that money. But they're not putting a lot of it into our housing. All they're doing is loosening up on the rules about intensification. Through policy, they're trying to help us with housing, but we need real dollars. In long-term care, they know we need to improve long-term care. We know we need to improve long-term care, and they're funding it. But we asked questions and we found out, oh, they're only funding a certain part of the cost. You know, as that person stays in the system, goes on to work for us and gets an increase, their benefits, that part they're not going to fund. That's why I want that breakdown on paper. We keep going back to that theme throughout our time. And so I think it's really important for us to use this year, when we made a serious investment through our residents. A 4.4% all-in increase means that we're doing all we can locally. We need our government partner, Ontario, to step up and help us with the parts of our budget that are really about addressing crisis.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just going to vary the process a bit and allow Councillor Wong-Tam to speak, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And I just want to thank all the staff who worked so hard to put together the budget for us. And of course, to thank the Budget Committee and through your leadership, Chair. I have tried to be at the Budget Committee every single day. It's, of course, obviously a very important time of year for everyone. But also, I wanted to just make sure that I could at least track the work of the Toronto Office of Recovery and Rebuild, to be quite honest. And largely because I do know that this is a budget that's largely shaped around the pandemic. But I also felt that it was really important for us to not lose line of sight of the people that we're serving. And I know that there are all good intentions here. I do want to flag one thing, and I would just be, you know, sort of really upset with myself if I didn't say it. And I think I'm going to try to say it in different ways as much as I can, including the fact that I'm probably going to take a few precious seconds to speak to it at council when we have our 5 minutes to wrap up. This condensed and truncated budget process is really challenging. I don't think I've ever not had a town hall that was established before the public deputations. And just given the fact that from beginning to end, we have almost 4 weeks to complete a $15 billion operating budget, a $46 billion capital budget, I'm just really worried that we're shutting out the citizens, the active residents of Toronto and business owners who need to know what we're up to. The pandemic has not made things easy. I recognize that. We're not connected to the communities in the way that we would like to. But I also feel that this very condensed budget process weakens our democratic institutions. And I want to cite that because this is a very important year, not because it's election year, but it's because it's been 2 years out from the pandemic beginning. And we need to ensure that we can actually reinforce and reinvest back in our communities the things that people need in order for them to be successful. And we've heard and received studies, and we've received all sorts of media reports that people are hurting in our city. They are desperately hurting, whether it's because of the loss of income, or the fact they're struggling with childcare, as I am, or the fact that their kids are not doing well because of the online learning environment. This has been a year where we've heard and seen that people need their government to invest in them more than ever before. And I'm just really worried that this budget doesn't meet the needs of the citizens of Toronto. And so I want to just flag that, you know, for us to be accountable to the public, to ensure public trust is at high and not at an all-time low, then we're going to have to rethink how the budget is cast in 2023. And this is not necessarily words of to discourage anyone on the screen, but I remember a time when the budget process, and it wasn't great then because it was already truncated by the first mayor that I worked under, Mayor Ford. But I also remember a time as a private citizen under previous administrations, where the citizenship of Toronto had close to 3 months to work through a budget, right? From the budget launch to the budget adoption. And town hall meetings were held across the city where citizens came out to evaluate their budget. City staff went out to speak to constituents and residents of the city, business owners of the city, about what the budget meant. And that was a really open democratic process. And the way that it has now been shrunken, I'm just really worried that we're eroding public trust, public accountability, and the democratic institutions that I'm very proud to be a party to. But I don't want this to continue to happen, not on my watch, and I hope it's not on your watch either. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Okay, the other speakers? Seeing none, Mr. Clerk, why don't we hand it over to you for the voting?
Mr. Chair, we can vote on the motions as they were presented.
Sure. I'm fine if we want to just vote on mine as a package, if the committee's willing.
Certainly, yeah. So we can place Councillor Crawford's motion on the screen.
Thank you very much. If I could see everybody. All in favor of those briefing note requests? Opposed?
I'm not turning my video on, Mr. Chair, but I'm in the affirmative.
In the affirmative. Okay, thanks, Councillor. Yeah. So in favor, opposed, that's carried. Next.
Second is Councillor McKelvey's motion. Let's place second in the meeting.
Okay, let's have a quick look at them and then we'll vote. Great, thank you.
Okay.
All in favor? Opposed, that also carries. Next, I believe.
Councillor Layton's motion is the third one that was placed.
I'd like to request a recorded vote on the 2C, 2D, 3, and 6, please. If anybody else wants to have any other votes, but I'd just like a recorded vote on those.
Okay. Mr. Chair, would you like 4 separate recorded votes, or would you like a recorded vote on?
It's whatever. If Councillor, we could do one each. Probably makes sense.
Okay. So why don't we start with part 2C of Councillor Layton's motion? I'm just simply. All in favor, please. I see Councillor Carroll, Councillor Layton. Actually, if we can just have the, let me just scroll through here. All in favor, just with hands up. I have Councillor Carroll and Councillor Layton in favor. All opposed. Chair Crawford. Speaker Nunziata. Councillor Lai and Councillor McKelvey. Mr. Chair, that motion fails 2-4. Or sorry, that part. So part 2D is our next one. And we can do, we're prepared. All in favor of part 2D. Councillor Carroll. All in favor of part 2D. Councillor Layton. And I only see 2. All opposed. Councillor McKelvey. Councillor Lai, Speaker Nunziata, and Chair Crawford, I believe. Again, that is that part 2D fails. You can move on to part 3. Part 3 of the motion. All in favor, please. Councillor Carroll and Councillor Layton. And all opposed, please. Councillor Nunziata, Councillor Lai, Councillor McKelvey, and Chair Crawford. And finally, part 6, please. All in favor of part 6 of Councillor Layton's motion? I have Councillor Layton and Councillor Carroll. All opposed to Councillor Layton's motion. Part 6, Councillor Nunziata, Councillor Lai, Councillor McKelvey, and Chair Crawford, I believe. And again, that is 2-4, and that part 6 also fails. Mr. Chair, on the balance of Councillor Layton's motion.
I don't need recorded unless the councillor does.
Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? I'd say that the balance of Councillor Layton's motion carries. And finally, we have the motion that was placed by Councillor Carroll. You can place on the screen.
Matthew, if you can see everybody, you can just, I'll move it. If you can just,
Sure.
I just can't see everybody at the moment.
Okay, so we'll take the motion down.
Oh, there we go. Okay. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. I think that's it, is it?
Mr. Chair, so we would need the committee should defer this item to the January 28th, the first wrap-up meeting. So we can have a motion to defer the item to January 28th.
Okay, Councilor McKelvey will move that to defer that, the item, and all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you, everyone, again. Appreciate the time with you this week. We'll see everyone on Monday for the public deputations. Bye-bye.